Welcome class to test number 4, video review units 10 through 12. We'll start with unit 10. Good luck!
So if you remember correctly, this Gemara begins with a quote from the Mishnah. Can you stop chewing on the balloon? It's making noise. Which, again, we're going back to the Mishnah. If someone else comes along and trips on the barrel and breaks it, so the ruling is that they're patur. So the Gemara asks the question, am I patur? Why is this person patur? They neededly yunei to watch where they're going. Okay, so the Gemara here doesn't like the ruling. It's a logical question on the ruling in the Mishnah, that if you have to watch where you're going, why are you patur for breaking the barrel? So the Gemara offers 3 different solutions, and if you remember correctly, these solutions are all ukimtot. Okay, and ukimta is where you take a statement. In this case, it's the line from our Mishnah that says if someone breaks the barrel, they're patur. And the Gemara is going to you take that statement and you say that it's talking about a different situation to avoid the problem. In this case, the problem here is shouldn't they have to watch where they're going? So the Gemara offers 3 ukimtos. Amr debe Rav mishmei de Rav. It was said in Rav's name. B'malei Rishut Rabim kula chaviyot. The first ukimta possible is that we're talking about a case where the entire Rishut Rabim was full of barrels. So even though you have to watch where you're going, you couldn't in this case because you had. Well, it's not you couldn't. You could watch where you're going, but you didn't have to because the barrels were in your way. Shmuel Amar Shmuel says ba'afelu shanu. We learned this in the dark, where it was too dark to watch where you're going, and that's why you're patur. Rav Yochanan Amar. Rav Yochanan said b'karen zavid. It's where it's around the corner. All 3 of these answers don't necessarily disagree with each other. These are all 3 possibilities of either where you don't have to, even though you have to watch where you're going, you're not held accountable. You're allowed to break it anyway because you have no other choice. It's in your way. Shmuel says because it's in the dark, and Rav Yochanan says the barrel's around the corner, so you didn't see it. All of these are limiting the statement of the Mishnah to these specific situations in order to solve the problem of why are you patur? You should have to watch where you're going. So now we understand why you're patur. You either couldn't watch where you're going, you didn't have to because it was in your way. Okay, so again, just to illustrate this, so the straightforward reading of the Mishnah would read that the person who tripped on the chavit is patur in all situations. But don't you have to watch his step, right? Isn't that's the kushya? In order to solve this problem, the Ukimta says we're talking about one of these situations. Amen. These are in Ukimta. After suggesting 3 different Ukimta to solve the Gemara's problem, the Gemara is going to take issue, specifically Rav Papa is going to take issue with the first ukimta, the first solution that we have. Because one rule we have about ukimta, I'll move this to the side here, is that although an ukimta does change around the situation, and it is kind of like making up what the Mishnah is talking about, it still must fit the words of the statement. So whatever statement you're saying, it's talking about situation A, situation B, it's got to fit the words of that statement in order for it to make sense. So the first solution that we're talking about a case where the area was blocked by barrels and therefore you're allowed to break them, does that fit the words of the Mishnah? Rav Papa is going to claim that it does not. So Amar Rav Papa says, Lo dekamatnit, the Mishnah does not fit, Ela oka Shmuel oka Rav Yochanan. It only fits according to Shmuel and Rav Yochanan, the last 2 answers. It's ikara, but if you want to say that Rav is correct, my irya nitka, why is it dealing with tripping? Afilu shibir nami, even if you broke it on purpose, you should be allowed to, you should be patur. So again, according to the first ukimta, that your area is blocked. The reason you're patur is because your way is blocked. You have nothing else to do, so you're allowed to break it on purpose. So if that's really true, then the Mishnah should have said if someone puts out a barrel in public and someone else comes along and stomps on it, they're patur because it was in their way. There's nothing they could have done. They had to get around it, or they had to get through it. From the fact that it says tripped as opposed to broke on purpose, sounds like it can't be talking about the situation. It does not fit the words. Okay, so again, just to illustrate. The Mishnah says the person who tripped on the chavit is patur, implying that if you'd be chayav, it was intentional, right? You're only patur because it was by accident. So according to these 2 answers, it's fine because both of these 2 answers assume that it was by accident, right? You just couldn't see it. But according to this answer, it sounds like this is going to be a problem because according to this answer, you're patur even if you do it intentionally. Yet the Mishnah implies that you're only patur if you do it by accident, but you'd be chayav if you're intentional. So this answer, this ukimta, does not fit our Mishnah. So what are we going to do about that? So let's read through this Gemara, the solution quickly in the Gemara, and then we'll chart it out as we did before. Amar Rav Zvid said, Mishmei de Rav in Rav's name, who had in the same ruling would apply to Afilu Shiber if he broke it on purpose in the Reisha. So why did it say only if you tripped? I did by limit Nisef because it needed to mention the Seifa. And what did it mention in the Seifa? Here's a quote. Vim huzak bav, if the person that broke the barrel was injured by it, Balachavit, the owner of the barrel, Chayav Benitko, has to pay for the injury. The Dafka Nitkal, that only makes sense specifically if they tripped. About Shiber Lo, but if they broke it on purpose, even though they'd be Patur, Lo, the person who owns the barrel would not pay for the injury. My time. What's the reason? Who does it? Nafshe. Because you're injuring yourself because you're breaking the barrel on purpose. Therefore, Katani Reisha Nitkal. So that's exactly why the Reisha said that person tripped. Not because the halacha only applies if the person tripped that they're patur, but because the seifa only makes sense if they trip. So they made the Reisha talking about the same situation. Let's look at this in visual form. So we have two parts of our Mishnah, the Reisha and the Seifa. The Reisha says the person who broke the Chavit is Patur. The Seifa says that the Chavit owner has to pay for any injury if the person who broke it got injured. So this Seifa only makes sense if it's accidental. The Reisha, the halach in the Reisha would make sense either if it was intentional or if it was accidental. In both cases, you'd be Patur. And so then why does our Mishnah choose accidental and say that if you tripped? Because it needs to match the Seifa, which talks about a case where it's accidental. Another way to look at it is like this. The Mishnah is talking about one case. So if the Reisha was talking about, if the Mishnah the Reisha would have mentioned that you broke it on purpose, so it would say it would read like this: the person who intentionally broke the chavit is patur, and if he is injured, the chavit owner must pay for the injury. But that's not true, because if you break it intentionally, the chavit owner does not have to pay for the injury, so it wouldn't fit. But if instead you wanted to, but if you want to read it, so if you want to read it as one case, the Reisha has to say the person who accidentally broke the chavit is patur, and if he is injured, the owner must pay for the injury. Then that would be correct. So again, if you want the Reisha and the Seifa to be talking about the same case, and for the ruling to make sense, so it has to be the Reisha talks about accidentally, because the Seifa only makes sense if they did it accidentally. So going back to our illustration of our problem with solution number one. According to our difficulty, this challenge, the problem that we raised, the Mishnah says the person who tripped on the chavit is patur. The assumption is, well, if you tripped, you're patur, but if it's intentional, you're chayav. So the Gemara says no. The reason why it says you tripped is not to teach us, if you tripped, you're patur, but if it's intentional, you're chayav. It's only because of the seifa that it mentioned tripped. It's only because of the seifa. Therefore, we don't say you're chayav if you're intentional. Actually, you are patur if it's intentional as well, and therefore this solution does fit the Mishnah, and therefore all three solutions are good. The second two, obviously, because it was accidental. And the third, because the halacha would apply the same if they broke it on purpose, you'd be patur, just the Mishnah doesn't mention it that way. Now, after all those three answers, which were solutions, which were based on the assumption that a person has to watch where they're going, Rav Ula, his statement is brought along to turn the whole thing on. It said, Amri Rav Abba Rav Ashi. Rav Abba said to Rav Ashi, Hachi Amri b'Marava. The following was said b'Marava in the west, which refers to Eretz Yisrael, which was to the west of Bavel. Mishmeid Rav Ula, and Rav Ula's name, Levisha Ein Darchan Shabnei Adam Liponeim B'Darachim, because it's not the darach, the nature of people. Lehit Boneim means to be very careful B'Darachim when they're walking on their paths. Meaning, even though a person needs to watch where they're going, they're not so specific. You look ahead of you, you don't look straight down, and it's very possible you'll miss what you're standing. So since it's not human nature, you're not obligated at all to watch where you're going. And actually, in all cases, you'd be patur for stepping on the barrel. I guess maybe if it was like wide open and obvious in your way, and you should have seen it, that would be one thing. But if it's it's kind of there and it's hard to see, so you'd be patur. So what we end up with is really two different versions of this conversation. In the first conversation, we'll draw a line between the two, right? In the first conversation, or sort of a line, in the first conversation, we assume that a person has to watch their step. And since a person has to watch their step, you can't understand the Mishnah is talking about it in all cases, because you have to watch where you're going. You shouldn't be patur, so it's got to be one of these three. But if you assume that you're not responsible to watch your step, because it's not human nature, then the reason you're patur for breaking the chavit is because you're not normally watching your step, and therefore in all situations you'd be patur, not just in one of these three or all of these three.
Now we will start with Unit 11. Good luck!
Thank you, Talia. Okay, so this unit we're going to do a little more quickly. This is the first of it in Ishti Lanafshe Gemara. This one we're going to do mostly without visuals because the logic isn't as complicated. Okay, so first, Shalach le Rav Chisda Rav Nachman, and Rav Chisda sent the following letter to Rav Nachman, or the following question to Rav Nachman. Harei Amr, we had said leRakuva Shalosh Levita Chamesh L'Samdekut Shalosh Esrei, that for injuring someone with each one of these different tools, a Rakuva, a Beita, and a Sanukoret, that the payment for embarrassing them, the specific penalty for the embarrassment, is either Shalosh 3 coins, Selas, Chamesh 5 Selas, or Shalosh 13 Selas. Lapanda Damar, Lokapina Damar. What about the handle or the handle of the blade of a hoe? What do you think our penalty should be? So again, the question was specifically about if we are penalizing people for the embarrassment they inflicted on someone when injuring them, and these were the ways that these are the penalties we've done in the past. What do you think the penalty should be in the following case? So Shalach le, he sent back to him. Rav Nachman sends back, Chisda, Knasa kam begabit beBavel. Are you really collecting knasot, fines in Babel? A knas means a fine, and a fine is a knas. Again, this is also one of the terms, is a penalty or a fine. And the important thing to know about a fine is that it is not set by halacha. The specific payment is not set by halacha. So what you're doing when you collect a knas is that you are basically, my handwriting is terrible on this, is that you're basically making up your own law. So he says, you're really collecting in Bavel. Bavel is not Eretz Yisrael, and in Bavel there is no real smicha. Okay, smicha is like becoming a rabbi, but back then it was like in a legit way where you can actually make new laws. And you can't make a knas in Bavel because smicha is only in Eretz Yisrael. That says Aleph Yud for Eretz Yisrael. And you're in Bavel, and therefore you can't use a kanas, which is making up a new law. So Rav Nachman continues, Emily Gufa of the Heichav. Why don't you tell me what happened, and I'll see what I could do. Shalach le Rav Chisda sent back to him. Gagruta, there was a well, the Beitrei that two people had. The Kol Yoma, that each day Havidali Chaminai, one of them would draw water. Atachad, one day one came. Kadali Biyom Delo Delay, and he drew water on the day that wasn't his. Amar le, the other person said, Yom Didu, it's my day, give me that water. Lo ishkach be. So the guy who took the water on the wrong day wouldn't listen to him. Shakel Panda Damari took the handle of a hoe, machie, and he smacked him with it, he beat him with it to get his water back. So now Rav Nachman said, listen, you can't impose a fine in this case. You can't impose fines at all for the busha. Because you're in Bavel, you don't have smicha, but maybe tell me what happened, I can help you out. So in fact, he does help him out. Amar le, Rav Nachman says back to him, Meya pandi v'pandi l'machaye, even 100 smacks with the hoe with l'machaye, he could have hit him. Because why was he allowed to beat the guy with the hoe in order to get his water back? That's the assumption, not just for fun or for revenge. Because a few laman da amar lo avid in nishnil anavshe. Even according to the one who says, lo, you don't, avid in ishtil nafshi. You can't take the law into your own hands. You can't, literally, avid in ishtil nafshi means a person can make a judgment for themselves. Even according to the one who says, lo, avid in ishtil nafshi, a person cannot create a judgment for themselves. B'makom pseida, there's another important term. In a case of pseida literally means loss or permanent loss. Avid inish dilan nafshi. A person can take the law into their own hands. A person can make their own law, and they can use, in our case, avid inish dilan nafshi is going to be to use force. Okay, a person can use force to get back what belongs to them. So what Rav Nachman is telling us, Rav Nachman is actually telling Rav Chisda, is that in this case the person was allowed to beat the other person with the hoe. Why? Well, it was a case of pseida, of loss, of permanent loss. Why is it permanent loss? Because even though he can get paid back for the water, you could take water the next day or 2 days in a row, right? You could take back, the next day, which is the guy's day, and then the day after that. But you need the water for today, and since you need the water for today, not getting that water today is considered to be a permanent loss. And since everyone agrees that in a case of permanent loss, you're allowed to take the law into your own hands, therefore he did what he was allowed to do, and no one would say that he has to pay for the injury at all. Di itmar, as it was said. Now here's the proof. Right? Dalet is always the proof letter. Di itmar, as it was said. So we're proving that in a case of in a case of loss like ours, that everyone says you're allowed to take the law into your own hands. Rav Yehuda Amar, Rav Yehuda said, Lo avid inish dilan nafshe. His opinion is you can't take the law into your own hands. Rav Nachman Amar, Rav Nachman said, Avid inish dilan nafshe. You're allowed to take the law into your own hands. Let's continue with this statement. However, Heicha de'ika pseida. Again, he's quoting a statement from somewhere else. Heicha de'ika pseida, where there is pseida, a loss, kule amalo pligi, everyone agrees, David and Ishdilanaf, you're allowed to take the law into your own hands. So there's our proof right there from this statement, because we have a statement earlier which says that in a case of loss, everyone agrees, and our case is a case of loss. Now the statement continues, ki plige, when do they argue? Heicha deleka pseida, where there's no permanent loss. Now what's the logic? Rav Yehuda Amar Lo V'Dinish Dilanavshe. Rav Yehuda says you can't. Why? To keep and to like upstate since there's no permanent loss. Lizu Kamai down. You got to go before court. Rav Nachman Amar. Rav Nachman says Avidinish Dilanavshe. You're allowed to. Why? To keep Medin Avid, because since you're doing what's right, you're getting back what's rightfully yours. Lo tarach. You don't have to go through the burden of doing things the right way. If you put me in a situation, if you created the situation, or someone else created the situation by taking something that doesn't belong to them, or holding on to something that doesn't belong to them, refusing to give up something that doesn't belong to them, then they put themselves in that situation. I don't have to be burdened to do things the right way. I can beat you up and take your stuff back. So just to conclude again, our case in the well was a case of pseida, of loss, permanent loss, and that's why Rav Nachman ruled everyone is allowed to take that you're allowed to take the law into your own hands in that case, because it's a case of a situation of loss, because you wouldn't have had that water for that day which you needed, and therefore everyone agrees. So again, of it inish dila nafshi or not, can a person make a judgment for themselves, take the law into their own hands? Well, it depends. In a case of pseida, in a case of loss, everyone agrees that you can. You are allowed to take the law into your own hands. In a case of leka pseida, where there's no loss, there's a machloket. Rav Yehuda says you cannot, because you have to do it the right way. That is the opinion of Rav Yehuda. You have to do it the right way. And Rav Nachman says, basically, it's not your problem, right? Since you're not the one who caused this situation, someone else has your stuff and refuses to return it, so it's not your problem. Therefore, you're allowed to take the law into your own hands, even though there's a way to get it back without using force. You can go through the court system, and you can, take it when they're not looking. Whatever that reason may be, there's lekab seid, there's no real permanent loss, or it's just like it's like $50 that they owe you, so they can just pay you back, as opposed to that $50. Still, since it's not your problem, you're allowed to take the law into your own hands.
This is the last unit, Unit 2.
We wish you good luck.
Good luck.
Okay, this unit begins with the phrase Mativ Rav Kahana. It's really actually a continuation exactly of where we left off the last Gemara. We just broke it up into two parts. The word Mativ means raises a challenge, raises a contradiction, raises a problem, however you want to phrase it. Rav Kahana is going to raise a challenge specifically with Rav Yehuda's opinion. Rav Yehuda was the one who said that you cannot take the law into your own hands in a case of no loss, that you're not permitted to. So that means that Rav Kahana is about to quote a statement that's going to contradict Rav Yehuda, and the statement that he quotes is going to make it seem like you're allowed to take the law into your own hands. Avid inish dila nafshi. So let's read it. So Mativ Rav Kahana brought the following statement as a challenge. Ben Bagbag Omer, Ben Bagbag says, Al tikanei zachatzer chavercha lital shelcha. Don't go onto your friend's property to take which is yours. Shelo b'reshut, without permission. Why? Shemet tira alav kiganav. You might look like a thief, and it doesn't look good, or whatever the reason may be. But the fact that you technically could go on their property and take it implies that there's no permanent loss. Ella, rather, what should you do? Shavor et shinav, break his teeth, which is clearly indicating that you're allowed to use, it sounds like you're allowed to use force. The Omer, and say to him, Lo, shaliani notel, I'm taking what's mine. So this is a clear indication that you're allowed to take the law into your own hands. So Rav Yehuda says you can't use force. Ben Bagbag says you break his teeth and say, I'm taking back what's mine. Ben Bagbag is clearly contradicting Rav Yehuda. Now, is that a problem for Rav Yehuda? Why isn't it just viewed as a machloket, an argument between Ben Bagbag and Rav Yehuda? Well, the real problem for Rav Yehuda is the fact that Ben Bagbag is a Tana, and Rav Yehuda is an Amora. And in general, when we have two statements that seem to contradict one another, we generally take the statement of a Tana over the statement of Amora. Tana came earlier, and we assume their traditions are closer to what's authentic. How do we know that Ben Bagbag is a Tana? How are we sure about that? Well, if you correctly, we looked at the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. If you want me to sing it, I'm not going to. No, I'm really not going to stop asking. Fine. Ben bag, omer. Ben bag, omer. Omer hafach ba, tekula ba. Ben bag, omer. It's the last time I'm going to sing when you ask me. So this is a Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. Pirkei Avot is a Mishnah, and if your name is mentioned in Mishnah, then you have to be a Tana. Therefore, we know that Ben Bagbag is a Tana, and if Ben Bagbag is a Tana, then he has more authority than Rav Yehuda, and therefore, if he says something that contradicts Rav Yehuda is in trouble. So how are we going to solve this problem? So the Gemara offers two solutions. Amar Le, he said back to him, I guess it was responded back to Rav Kahana, Imach, literally means with you, meaning is the truth with you. Ben Bagbag Yechidahu, where Ben Bagbag is a Yachid, an individual. Upligi Rabbanan Aleh, that rabbis argue with him, meaning it's very nice that you're quoting the statement of a Tana which goes against an Amora, but how do you know all the other Tanaim of that time agreed with him? Ben Bagbag's a Yachid, and people usually, right, the Rabbanan usually argue with Ben Bagbag. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit later about where the Gemara gets that from. You can't, how can you just assume that everyone argues with Ben Bagbag? That's possible solution number one. Again, that Rav Yehuda. So again, Rav Yehuda says you can't use force. Ben Bagbag says you can use force. Break his teeth and take back what's mine. The Gemara says don't worry. Even though Ben Bagbag's a Tana, he's a Yechida. He's an individual opinion. Most people disagree with Ben Bagbag, so we don't care if he contradicts Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda is going with the more popular opinion of Tanaim. The Gemara's second solution is from Rav Yanai. Rav Yanai said, My shavor et shinav. What does it mean break his teeth? Badin, in court with judgment. Meaning, Rabbi Yana is saying that, yes, on face value, sounds like Ben Bagbag is saying to physically break his teeth, which goes against Rabbi Yehuda. But maybe when he says break his teeth, he actually means that as a metaphor. That break his teeth means in court, and therefore it is no longer a contradiction, because Ben Bagbag is actually saying, not only is it not a contradiction, it seems to be that he's agreeing with Rabbi Yehuda, because he's saying that you break his teeth in court. Now, where does Ben Bagbag get the idea from that breaking your teeth might mean in court, to prove somebody wrong in court? So in order to figure this out, we engage in a little bit of what we call academic Talmud study on a very basic level, which is using non-classic sources to try to understand where the Gemara is coming from, right? Someone learning Gemara in a more classic way, more yeshiva way, might say, okay, fine, so maybe break his teeth sounds like something, you're taking someone's power away, which means that we're proving them wrong. Okay, I trust the Gemara, but should we use? Are there other sources we can use to prove that's true? Well, coming up is Pesach, and if you look in the Hada, we saw that when you talk to the wicked one, the Ben Harasha, so he says, "What is this? What ma'avodah zot lachem? What is this that you're doing? Lachem v'lo lo." He's saying it to you, not to him. He rejected everything, and it says, you blunt his teeth. You take away the sharpness of his teeth. And what do you say? If you were there, you wouldn't have been redeemed. Meaning, you don't really believe that this stuff is wrong. The only reason you're saying this because you know that you would not have been redeemed at that time. So blunting his teeth is a way, in this case, where are we here? Blunting his teeth is a way of dulling or weakening his argument. So perhaps in our case as well, when it says break his teeth, or in this case, here it says blunt his teeth, or break his teeth, it means take away his argument and prove him wrong in court. It actually makes sense. Break his teeth. So is this actually a good solution? Remember, the Gemara gave one solution that maybe the rabbis argue with Ben Bagbag. Again, the Gemara thought that wasn't a good enough answer because it had to come up with a different answer and said, maybe when it says break his teeth, it meant in court. Is that really true, though? If it's a metaphor, like we said, if you're going to make up some kind of ukimta and say, when it said break his teeth, it means break his teeth in court. It's not really an ukimta, but it's changing the basic meaning. Well, it's got to make sense. It's got to fit the words. So the Gemara says the following, if it really is a metaphor, v'amar lo, and say to him, v'omrim lo, they say to him, the court says to me, it should have said, it should have said, Shaliatan aninotel, I'm taking back what's mine. Shalohu notel, he's taking back what's his. It should have said. Meaning, if Ben Bagbag says, break his teeth and say, I'm taking back what's mine. Could that be a metaphor for Beit Din? If really break his teeth means in court, you don't say, I'm taking back what's mine. They would say, he's taking what's his? Because the Beit Din would be the one issuing the order. From the fact that it doesn't say that, it implies that it cannot be a metaphor for Beit Din. So the Gemara basically had two solutions for Rav Yehuda. One is to say, we don't really follow Ben Bagbag. But that answer wasn't really good enough, because where'd the Gemara get that from? And answer number two is to say, it's a metaphor for Beit Din, but we said that doesn't really fit the rest of the words. So the Gemara concludes, Kashya or Kushya. It's a Kushya. It's a problem for Rav Yehuda. And there's no real way to square Ben Bagbag's opinion with Rav Yehuda's opinion. Okay, so that's basically the Gemara. What we're going to do quickly now is to go back to one part from before and engage in a little bit, on a very basic level, what we called academic Talmud study. And we said academic Talmud study is looking for the less classic sources. Sometimes they could be secular, sometimes they could be Torah sources as well, like this one, to help us understand what's going on in the Gemara on a truthful level, and without having to just take the Gemara at face value. So here we're going to look into Tosefta. The Tosefta is a collection of Braitot. Again, a Braita is a statement that from a Tana that didn't make it into the Mishnah, and sometimes they're collected into collections called a Tosefta, but there's one in Masechet Bava Kama, and ours in Masechet Bava Kama conveniently quotes Ben Bagbag a little bit differently than it's found in our Gemara, but it's going to help us understand where our Gemara came from. Why did our Gemara reject the answer, or not use the answer, not be satisfied with the answer that Ben Bagbag is a Yachid? So if we look at the Tosefta, it says the following. Ben Bagbag Omer, Yitol Adam Shalom Beit Chacherim. Right, you shouldn't take what's his from someone else's house. Shema Yerakaganav, you might look like a thief. V'chein Ben Bagbag Omer. Similarly, Ben Bagbag would say, Al Yignov Adam et Shalom Beit Haganav. Don't steal what belongs to you from the house of a thief. Why? Shema Afhu Yerakaganav. So you don't also look like a thief. Rather, what do? Break his teeth and take back what's yours. Take back what's yours from his hand. What you'll notice in this Tosefta is that Ben Bagbag here is the only one mentioned here. Okay, he's the only. There's no opinion of the rabbis here. There's no one else arguing with Ben Bagbag. So that could be help us understand why the Gemara wasn't satisfied with the first answer. Ben Bagbag just a Yachid, and everyone argues with him. That makes sense if there's another opinion mentioned alongside Ben Bagbag. When you look in the Tosefta, you'll see it's clear that the Tosefta only mentions Ben Bagbag, and therefore chances are that everyone agreed with Ben Bagbag, or at least there was no one on record as arguing with Ben Bagbag, and therefore it's hard to say that he was only Yachid. That's why the Gemara went on to the second answer, maybe break his teeth means in court, and the Gemara rejected that answer as well, which is why I was left with a Kushya. So that concludes our review of Units 10 through 12. The test will be on Thursday, and we wish you all
good luck.
Good luck.